Boomers need to stop fucking taking credit for other generations' accomplishments and stop trying to steal their goddamn identity. The person who posted the comment thread that got me all riled up to make this fucking video deleted it, so I can't tag back to it. But every goddamn time I make generational content that includes silent generation and boomers, people come into the comments with some bullshit trying to claim silent gen civil rights movements and accomplishments for fucking boomers. The person tried to claim Bob Dylan for the fucking boomers. He's not a goddamn boomer. Silent gen has Bob Dylan and Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Act. That's theirs, okay? Boomers have Ted Nugent, the Wolf of Wall Street, and trickle-down economics. It's a common misconception because boomers have been trying to steal silent gen's identity for fucking ever. So I attempt to explain it. I say that boomers were born 46 to 64. That is their generational timeline. Therefore, Bob Dylan, born in 1941, can't be a fucking boomer. Or any other civil rights era protest singer for that matter. Then we can go through the civil rights era timeline, 48 to 68. I'm not saying that civil rights stuff didn't happen outside of that timeline, but that is the civil rights era. And it's defined by specific legislation and specific acts of protest and civil disobedience. Like the Montgomery boycott in 1955, when the oldest boomers were fucking 9. And the Greensboro sit-ins in 1960, when the oldest boomers were 14. Freedom Riders in 61, March on Washington in 63, all happened before any boomer ever came of age. And as a result of all of that stuff that no boomers were there for, we got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when the oldest boomers were just graduating high school and the youngest boomers were currently being born. And we had the Civil Rights Act of 1968, and it all kind of culminated in the Summer of Love, Woodstock, 1969. As much as boomers love to act like they were the Woodstock generation, the average boomer was 14 fucking years old during Woodstock. And half the time they try to argue saying they don't agree with the brackets for the boomer generation like it's up for fucking debate. The person literally said she didn't agree with my opinion on when boomers were born and they were really born in the early 40s. No, the fuck they weren't. Hard to have a baby boom when all the men are on the other side of the goddamn ocean shooting Nazis and not at home fucking their wives. Which is why silent gen is silent gen, because they were a tiny generation sandwiched in between really big events like the Great Depression and World War II. And baby boomers are baby boomers because at the end of 1945, everybody came back from the war and started making up for lost time banging their wives, and there was a fucking baby boom. And in these videos, I always inevitably get people complaining about labels and generalization. In fact, I'm sure there's gonna be lots in this video because people will have offendedly rushed to the keyboard before they made it to this part. I'm not gonna apologize for generalizing generations or anything I ever generalize, because if I'm doing it for a reason. And generalizations are not inherently bad. They can be used in bad ways, but they're also an important and effective tool to help us understand, address, and react to important socio-political and economic issues. I get it. We're all individuals and we don't all fit into the same little box, but when we're trying to address big picture issues, nobody gives a fuck that you're a special little snowflake. For example, I'll pick on a cohort I belong to, men. Men are responsible for the vast majority of violent crime and harassment against women. Now, am I a violent criminal? Absolutely not. And do I try to make the best efforts to be courteous and respectful to women? Absolutely. And I have the self-awareness and honesty to say, you know what, I've probably not always been successful with that either. But I make a very genuine effort to not be that kind of person. So when we bring up the generalized, overarching issue of men perpetrating violent crime and harassment, I don't get offended because I know it's not specifically about me. But it's about my cohort. Not me as a man specifically, but men in general are responsible for the majority of these issues. And we can't honestly and effectively address those issues unless we acknowledge that fact and address why. This is the same thing with generational generalizations. For example, with us millennials, 9/11 and the housing crash and 20 years of war in the Middle East really affects how we see the world, how we vote, how we interact with society. Even though not every millennial has the same lived experience, these things can help our elected officials in society see where we're coming from as a cohort. It can help us identify and assess and hopefully address the issues that are facing us. So when we say boomers, we're talking about boomers as a cohort, not each individual boomer. There's lots of great boomers out there who didn't vote for Ronald Reagan and aren't total douchebags. But boomers as a cohort run the fucking government and are responsible for the decisions that affect all of our lives today and have been for the past 4 fucking decades. And as a cohort, they've caused a lot of fucking problems. So if we're going to try to undo a lot of the problems that they've caused and stop them from creating more fucking problems, we need to understand things like, as a cohort, why are they the ones who are most susceptible to propaganda and conspiracy theories? Why as a cohort do they feel that they are the hardworking ones who worked for everything they had and everybody else is entitled and lazy? lazy? Why do they think that they're qualified to write legislation about the internet when they don't know what fucking Wi-Fi is? These things require generalizations to understand and address, which is literally why we have generations in the first place. It's why we have any demographic. It's why we take the goddamn census. So when these kinds of generalizations come up, instead of getting offended and being like, not all boomers, not all men, don't lump us all together, just take a moment for some introspection. Does that generalization apply to you specifically? No? Okay. Is it being used to harm or oppress an at-risk group of people like minorities? No? Okay. Then woosah. If those generalizations are bad and they do apply to you, use that introspection to be a better fucking person rather than just getting offended about being called out about how shitty you actually are.